This hangout is now on air! Yay!
Hi.
Okay,
Hi.
so I'm Maggie Baker, and this is our little hangout about small games and small game spaces. I'm going to try to set it up so that other people can comment in the G+ thread, because I really think that's where, we're not going to get a lot of drive-by viewers on YouTube right now. And let's just roll right into it. I'm going to introduce each of you by name, and then if you each could just say very briefly sort of what your interest in small games and small game spaces is, if you've written any small games, and then we will talk about a couple other things and keep rolling with that. So I have with me Flavio Martorino and Renata Ramonda and Kira Magran. So you guys are, I'm going to go by the order I see you on my screen. So Flavio, that puts you first to introduce yourself briefly for our viewing audience.
Yeah, well, I'm Flavio, and I actually am here because I work with Renato on a small game that is called Scandal in the Deep, that has been published in the previous to last number of Words Without Masters from Epiraya Ravachol. And well, actually it was all Renato's fault for me being interested in this kind of small games. Well, we already worked together on other things, so it was natural to work with him. Up to you.
Okay, Kira, you are the next person in line according to me.
Okay.
Oh, cool. All right. Hey, I'm Kira Magran. I really like small games and small spaces. I think that there are ways for designers to kind of try out small ideas and kind of get ideas out of our systems and try different mechanics and expose a game to a lot of people at conventions, for example, in one-shots. I think a lot of games that are small games are also one-shots. And I've written 2 small games. I wrote one about kinky car fetishes and car crashes based on that David Cronenberg movie called Crash Into You. It's okay. And I also just finished one for the indie mixtape that's coming out that is a collection of romantic games. And the game that I wrote was, what was it called? Oh, I'm terrible. But it's about kind of, it's a kinky game about tanks. Strict Machine, that's what it's called.
Okay. And so then we have Renato, if you want to say more.
Hello. Yeah, I'm
Hello.
Renato. I'm yeah, I initially started Scandal in the Deep as a joke, basically, but I got interested in making it as this small game, and Flavio basically pushed and prodded me until I finished it.
Yay! That's great. Okay, I'm going to see if I can figure out here in the G+ world how to say, ask us questions. But I may not be able to figure that out. So if that's the case, that's the case. Yeah. There's all this technology we use all the time that half of us that I don't actually know how to use. So.
Oh, and Maggie,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the on-air thing, but you're the only one without the lower third. At least
Oh, man.
I don't see it.
Okay, I'll see if I can fix that. Okay. Great. I think I have to close. Right. Okay. So I'll figure that out. But I want to introduce myself first with what I do in terms of small games. I'm Maggie Baker. I make little games. 1001 Nights and Siren are comparatively little, or at least they were when they came out. 1001 Nights is 45 pages, which when it came out in a sea of much, much bigger games, bigger in every way, that was small. But it wasn't small enough. So now I'm in the middle of, I just today released the third of a cycle of 8 really small games that I'm writing this year through Patreon. I'm writing them anyway, but Patreon is helping. And I really became really interested in looking at small social footprint, small design space, and small physical objects. So those are the three things I'm hoping that we can address in this. And the ones that I've written would definitely count, like Cyrun the Pursuit is really quite small and plays out in a G+ thread. Holly and the Ivy, In the Company of Birds, Bless the Seeds, those are all games that are designed to play out. Like, you need to be done with that game in under half an hour, sort of thing. So it's a neat space to examine, and that's why I'm really excited to have you guys here and to talk about this a little more. And the first thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to introduce this, and then I'll sort out my lower third bit, and we'll continue from there, is that question of sort of small social footprint, where you don't need a lot of people, you don't need a lot of space. Scoundrel in the Deep, I played on my porch with Flavio facilitating for Epi and I. It's like, it was just 2 little chairs and a couple matches, and that's really all we needed. So let's talk about that for a little bit, like designing for a small social footprint, small amount of space, small amount of time, and why we choose to do that, why that might be something we'd be interested in exploring. Whoever wants to go first?
Yeah, if I may start with an anecdote.
Please.
It happened very recently. Flavio, we were at a small con here in Milan, and Flavio met an old friend of his, and he mentioned, "Oh yeah, I actually published several role-playing games," and he was not particularly familiar with those, and what he said was, "Oh, wait a minute, the role-playing games, those are those games with the huge book, right?"
Exactly. Like, that's the opinion. That's the thought. Is it's like, oh, it has to be a big 8.5 by 11. If it's under an inch thick, go home.
Yeah.
You know, all that sort of thing.
Add to that, I mean, the hobby is aging, and people have jobs and don't have much time. I know I don't. And so it's doubly important to I think, to have something you can play without feeling you didn't actually play it fully.
Right.
And you get a satisfying game, and often a satisfying story in a very short time. And you don't need the standard 4 or 5 people party plus GM and a room dedicated to that, and hours or months or years.
Years. And I find myself torn between those two extremes. Like, I loved playing the decade-long game of Ars Magica that I played with Emily and Vincent. It was fantastic. I love playing long in-depth games of Monster Hearts or Apocalypse World or whatever. But the reality in my life is that I play a lot more one-shots, and having games that provide a full sense of story in a short amount of time was really important and really useful. Vincent's arriving for technical support if we need it. I'm just figuring out lower third to try and get the lower third operational. Yeah, it doesn't.
Not mine.
Don't worry about it. Okay.
Not my circus.
Sorry?
Not my circus, not my
Not
monkeys.
my circus, not my monkeys. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so Flavio, do you have a take on that?
Yeah,
that,
well,
small space?
The anecdote Renato talked about, it actually happened. So yeah, many of the things he already said, I have the same opinion, but also having a small number of people that you need to start the game is also a thing that you can do with people that is not that is not used to play. So maybe you can have a small game to actually export the game to people that were not usually interested in role-playing games. Also, they have the opinion that the game is something that you have to read a lot of pages of books and maybe full of things that they don't need or they don't are interested in. While if you pitch them a thing that can be up and finished in 30 minutes, maybe you'll find a moment in which they are willing to do that. And when they see that that is actually entertaining, they maybe will come back and try something else or other one-shot small games.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a really good idea to try and have many of these small games also in different forms, because what we did with Scandal in the Deep was using something that is never been used, as I know, as a mean to give pacing in the game, because actually it's just that, it's not a mechanical resolution of something unless you burn your finger. But yeah, I seem to remember that there are many different kind of small games, from LARPs to actual role-playing games with more than 2 people. But maybe we'll get back to giving examples in another moment. Or do
So
we need
Kira,
to?
what about?
I was thinking to Out of Dodge from Jason Morningstar, which is also a small game. In an hour, it's finished, and you can play that on a car. So when you have a trip to do in just an hour, you can play a game that is actually a LARP, but is really small and is really entertaining for the many different things that are in motion in that game.
Yeah. What about you, Kara?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you were saying. I think that as far as like space and time, like the time it takes to learn like a giant rule book versus like read 2 pages, it makes them more accessible to people who are new to the genre, and also more accessible for people who just might not have that much time to spend on prep. And, you know, like you were saying, like, you know, we've got jobs and kids and stuff. We don't have hours and hours to write a campaign necessarily all the time. So small games are good for that type of thing. They're accessible. And I think that it also, you know, as far as making small games, it's more accessible for people to create too, because it's like kind of less stress and less commitment as far as like having to publish many pages or having to hire someone to make art, or you know, having to actually print it versus just kind of sharing a PDF on the internet. Like, so I think small games are kind of cool in like a small press sense, because you can make a ton of them and just put them online, and it's not very hard for people to make them. So that gets more people making games too, the fact that you can make smaller ones. Yeah. And you were saying like Patreon is a good place, you know, that a lot of people are making small games right now. Like you're on there, and
it's like we could fill a whole column of like all the people out there making little games on Patreon. Yeah,
it's fabulous. I really like it. Because I mean, the more games, the more ideas you put out there, you know, it kind of like energizes the design movement. You've got like a lot of different things happening all over the place, instead of just like 5 big books that define, you know, all of role-playing games. Yeah. So I think that creates like a shift in you know, what people are designing in general too.
Yeah, and that segues into like sort of the next point in terms of what we're designing and what we're designing for. Something you just said, Kira, about the, I don't know if you said it concretely, but what it hooked into in my brain was the next thing I want to talk about, which is the design space in terms of what stories we're telling. Because if you're doing a great big campaign, oh, it's prep when you're talking about like doing prep for a game. If you're doing a whole complex, rich, wonderful, deep world, you're doing world building, you're doing all kinds of prep work, you're doing maps, you're doing relationship webs, and all these really cool tools that we have to make a role-playing game just fabulous and sustaining and richly textured, and all these great things that a role-playing game can be. And that takes a lot of time and energy, and I love doing that time and energy, but I don't always have it. So something that I really like about small games is that we can examine a different section of the story. We don't have to have a huge overarching plan as a GM, or even any overarching plan as a GM. We don't have to have complex characters and backstory and things like that. It can just be as simple as, okay, you're in the darkness and you've got a couple matches, and that's what you've got. Go. There's not a lot of long, like, you're not spending an hour making a character for Scoundrel in the Deep. And for In the Company of Birds, which is this little dice game, you're not making characters at all. You're doing things where you're doing where I feel, as someone currently working on small games, what I'm looking at is designing for a slice, a snapshot, just this action, not the whole life, not the whole story. I don't care about my characters' every nuance. I just want to know how they react in this specific moment, and I have this thing that comes over and over my head as I do the design work for the Playing Nature's Year games, the cycle of 8 games I'm doing this year, about do one thing well. I don't need to know what your proficiencies are for anything like that. Can you make this bit of land into a garden, and can you stack up these dice? That's all that matters. That's it right now. And I think that provides these really, really rich and beautiful windows instead of having to do a whole skyline. And that's where I'm intrigued by that aspect of small games in terms of design space. I don't know, do you guys have a similar take, different take?
Yeah, it's really a matter of scale and focus. Yeah. So, yeah, it's true. Many of these small games don't even have character generation. Mm-hmm. They barely have characters at the start of the game. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Sunderlands games, they only tell you one line about your character, and then you go. And yeah, it's amazing the ability of people in recognizing patterns and stories. Mm-hmm. So you don't really need a lot to start.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe important to underline for people that never tried small, tiny games that it's not that you're getting let's say a less deep version, a skin deep game that will leave you without I don't know a connection with the character, and no, you actually when you finish the game, you know more about that character, you know more about you.
Yeah, it's like the discovery process. Instead of front loading, where you do all the character creation and all the thinking about, like, okay, what are all the things, what am I going to spend my points on, and what all those, doing that all at the beginning. Instead of that, you have a game that gives you the discovery process, and by the time you come to the end of one of these little games, like, I haven't played Crash Into You, so I'd be really curious to hear Kira's take on that. But my experience with writing the small games I've written and playing the small games that I have played is that you come to the end of the small game feeling satisfied, like, oh, that was a really cool story, and now I know this character who I had no clue about. It's like in Siron the Pursuit, I start the game with amnesia and a little set, and like sometimes I don't even know my name or my gender or my anything. Go. Okay. So how does Crash Into You work? Does that have emergent character experience in that same way?
Oh goodness, kind of not. I mean, a little.
Great. Not as good. Let's hear a different take on it.
It's okay. To be honest, I think it was like my first experiment with a small game. It's a nano game, so it's like real tiny. You know, it's like Vast and Starlit and all those ones that are just like, this is a page long. Mm-hmm. But I think my newer one that I just did, Strict Machine, is kind of more about, it's like a short story, you know, that's kind of how I think about the scale of it, as far as telling stories and getting into characters and like creating a narrative. It's kind of more like a movie to me when I think about short games or one-shots, right? Like, we're all creating this movie together. What are we going to focus on in this movie? What kind of director are we? Are we like art house or are we action? You know, and then like that kind of creates like the genre and the setting and like how much you might get into your character or how much you might be doing other things in that game. I think that's how I think about like short games and small games and the scale of them. I also think about role-playing games in general as very cinematic. You know, like when you're telling stories around a table. So. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That. I think it's Flavio's turn.
Yeah, Flavio, do you want to add anything to add to that?
Well, not so much. I think that well, what is already been said about the slice, the small slice of a focused story is really interesting because, as you said, it just puts the people puts the story in media res, so you can tell just what the events folding out change the character or maybe create the character or the view you have on the characters, if there are characters, obviously. I'm just thinking. I saw a comment on the event. There is Solange Simonsen that is asking us if all small games are story games.
I saw that very thing. Yeah.
So maybe we can address that.
Sure. I want to underline one thing you just said, though, which is an incredibly useful phrase, which I think would behoove people to use more. The in media res.
Yeah.
You know, to join the story in process. That we don't need to see the beginning. You know, sometimes we don't need to see the end. You know, and that's super useful.
Yeah, I recently heard it was a suggestion for writers.
Yeah.
Could be on Ken and Robin's podcast. That's basically, but they were citing someone else. That basically says when you write a short story, write it down, then take your first 5 pages and throw them away, because probably the story starts not at the beginning. Start with the actual story. We don't need to know how your character felt when he woke up this morning.
Yeah, I think that's
or
an excellent.
Maybe we do, but then the story is about that.
Yeah. And it'd be a good challenge, right? Like, write a whole and compelling story about the first 5 minutes of waking up. You know, and then it becomes, you know, then the comment about whether it's a novel or whether it's a short story, and like whether it's a haiku. You know, how much information is necessary to have a complete experience, whether that's a complete experience of reading something or playing a game. Yeah, and I don't think, to get to Solange's question, I don't think that all small games are story games. I don't think so. I'm not sure. I haven't played all of them because, you know, a lot of them. In the company of birds, in the company of birds, it's like right on the fine line between dice game and story. You know, it's very close.
There's a lot of small LARPs too, right?
Yes.
So yes, I don't think that really falls into the story game category necessarily.
Yeah. Well, for small LARP, and that's where we get into like the third point I want to touch on. We'll try and keep Solange's question in mind. Was about that part of the design. Like, Kira, you referenced the nano games where you're looking at 1 page of rules. And I know that Scoundrel in the Deep is similarly very short. Bless the Seeds, which just came out to my Patreon group today, is like a little, it's just over 2 pages. These are small games in terms of that. But the LARP footprint is a little different, because then you're looking at a slightly different space. Like I played, what's the one I played? previous occupants, which is a LARP for 4 people.
Yeah.
You know, it still takes a couple hours. So I'm curious to hear about LARPs. Are you aware of LARPs that take a much shorter time?
Oh, well, I mean, I think actually a lot of LARPs take about that amount of time, even if they're small. Like, I'm thinking of, like, small one-shot LARPs. I mean, I guess most LARPs are one-shot, but a lot of them will fit into the 4-hour slot. Like, Summer 11, it only takes 6 people. You only require a room. It's only, like, 10 pages long. But, you know, it might take, like, 3 to 4 hours to play. So I guess they can still be like a short physical game, like a small physical game, and like require a tiny amount of people that you can play spontaneously. But they might take a little bit more time than 1 to 2 hours. There's those trapped in a room games, which are debatably a LARP, right?
I wish I'd invented that. Like all those that are playing the New York scene of like, oh my God, why didn't I do that? Because like we were playing that when I was a kid, you know,
Right.
running around the house going, okay, how do we get out of this? Yeah.
And those are usually an hour long, so.
Yeah. I think that then it's interesting, like how short is a short LARP? Is a short LARP like if you're LARPing waiting for the bus? that's a pretty short LARP.
Yeah. Or Are You a Werewolf, right? I mean, that's a pretty short game.
Yeah. No, I'm not a werewolf. Okay, we're done.
Okay. I am.
I kind of remember a LARP. I don't remember if it was in English before being translated in Italian. I saw that being played in a convention in 2008 in Italy, which was actually done in an elevator with just 3 characters, and I think that it was a LARP that lasted 15 minutes.
Wow.
To play it. So, because one of the players plays the devil, if I remember right. So yes, you can have LARPs with less than 2 hours long play.
Yeah.
And it's also a matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also a matter of context and what many people think about when you say LARP is maybe buffer LARPs, where you take a couple of days in the woods and you have to have made costumes and weapons for months before. So that's the social footprint of that is huge, even related to the length of the game.
Yeah.
So I think even a LARP that maybe lasts 2 or 3 or 4 hours, but does not strictly require costumes and only a couple of props, is already the tiny version of a LARP.
Which is interesting because that means that Luke Crane's amazing Inheritance LARP would come in as a small game because it plays out in just a few hours with 9 people. And yeah, and I'm thinking of Matteo Stendariterini's game Navanta Minuti, and like 90 minutes is short for a game.
Yeah, it is.
To play out a full game. I think that fits right in there with Vast and Starlit and other ones we've referenced.
I distinctly remember discussions maybe 5 years ago, not a century ago, about how it would be, I mean, completely impossible to make a role-playing game last less than 3 or 4 hours, because that would be too short. How can you do that? And now we have so many, I don't even have read all of them.
That's really true.
I have a weird question about that. Is that, like, are we, and this is esoteric and strange and deep thoughts, are we seeing the result of a decreased attention span and a decreased sense of time available? Because our lives, so much of our lives now is so much about instant gratification. What's the next thing? You know, what's the next screen that pops up? The next thing on BuzzFeed or whatever. And I see this with my kids' lives. So I'm like, there's so much pressure, like, oh, I have to go finish the internet. And it takes up all the free time that we used to spend, hanging out and telling stories or hanging out and playing role-playing games. What's your take on that? Do you think is that just a momentary deep thought, or do you think there's some validity to, is our attention span shifted from the times of the 80s when we had hours all day Saturday? Maybe we were just teenagers, but I'm seeing this with the teenagers that I know, seeing the same thing of shorter games, one shot, a couple hours and done. And I wonder if what do you think about that?
So, games for the age of Twitter.
Sorry?
Games for the age of
the computer, yeah. Basically. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think so necessarily. Like, I think I can see how maybe some of that is true. I think a lot of teenagers who are getting into gaming, though, are getting in through D&D and Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Which are like big. I mean, in the U.S. anyway. I don't know if that's true for you guys too. But so I think that they're getting into these games that are actually like heavy and take a lot of time, as opposed to like playing shorter games. I think that there's more small games because there's more people who are creating small games and small press. There's like more interest in designing them, and I think that's actually why there's a whole lot of them that are short and accessible. Awesome. And also, like, kind of like a focus on convention play to a certain extent. And, like, convention games have to be, like, to 2 to 4 hours. Like, at Games on Demand, where we run, like, small press games at Origins and Gen Con, you can have a 2-hour game at Gen Con, and it's a one-shot, and it's a tabletop game. And you play that 2-hour game, And so that kind of is a full game, but it's also exposure to a lot of different games, so you get to try different things. So I don't know. I think there's lots of reasons. I don't know. It's necessarily because we don't have as much time. Although maybe that's partially true. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of people who have a lot less time. We've talked about like jobs and family and like other commitments, and our lives are fuller. I think we have more packed into them. I have more packed into mine than I did 10 years ago, and certainly more than I did 20 years ago. And so I think that is a part, but I hear you really clearly. Like that there's an accessibility to making smaller games. And what we have done, the push we have made as independent designers to like knock down that 8.5 by 11 hard copy inch thick game as the standard, to knock that down and say, no, anything goes. It's 450 words and it tells a story, good. It's, whatever you got, we're good for that. And I think that that's fantastic. I do agree that puts the ability, or the, maybe not necessarily the ability to design, but it removes some of the barriers of design. Like if I can put out games that do one thing well, or say here is one awesome scene that you get to explore, one interesting exchange that you get to riff off and create from, and that allows you to see you can do something like that, you go do something like that, that's amazingly cool. And it's very different than saying, well, first you have to come up with a stat list, and then you have to come up with your skill sets. And how are you going to put just longbows and crossbows, or are you going to have recurve bows in there too? And you better get your stats right for those, because someone is going to correct you on them.
Well, what you're saying and what you and Kira just said, make me think.
Flavio, I'm losing you a little. Can you speak up?
Oh, yeah. Do you hear me?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
What you just said and what Kira just said made me think about also the question from Solange. Well, I think that there is a need to have small games also due to the fact that we have less time. And it makes me think about other small games that are not story games or role-playing games, but are just what we as board gamers call filler games. So we need card games that are being played in just half an hour. And for example, the games that comes to my mind right now are games designed by Daniel Solis,
Yeah.
which are all small games, but are not role-playing games, are not story games. They are just card games with just card games. They explore actually most of them explore just one thing, as you were saying, doing one thing good in very good. And most of his games released on drive-through cards are they use just a couple of mechanics, and they use it really well to deliver an entertaining game in just half an hour. I'm thinking specifically to Suspense, which is a game for 3 persons, which also gets for the social
Footprint. Yeah.
footprint you were referring before. So there are also other ways, other reasons that that are in common with other kinds of games that are not just story games or role-playing games.
Yeah.
I also think that maybe since those games are getting a lot of attention because you can use them between games that are bigger to actually free your mind between a big game and another big game. You just use a filler to fill up the 30 minutes time you need to take a breath. At the same time, why don't you do that with a story game, a role-playing game? So maybe one of the design challenges that drove some of us to do some of these small games is the same as someone that is doing a card game, a really small card game.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, because it is a little bit like take a break from whatever else. And that hits exactly the games that I'm writing right now in terms of taking a break. Not everything has to be saving the world, and not everything has to be epic and huge or, you know, monumental or emotional. Like, you know, playing a cycle of Monster Hearts, that's an emotional ride. And sometimes after that, you just want to, can I just do some little tiny thing? It's like a palate cleanser, you know, between courses to keep your hand in. I also think it's a good in terms of playing and in terms of designing as a way to keep that muscle active. If you're not playing in big, long games, but you want to, or you just want to keep having a little bit of gaming going on in your life, small games are a great way to do that because of the small social footprint. And in terms of design work, I find, and Vincent and I have talked about this before, like Dogs in the Vineyard came out, and that was his first big game. And then there were several smaller games that came out, Poisoned and, oh gosh, what's the other one? Anyway, I'm blanking on a game that I was there at the start of. Wicked Age. Haha, I got it. Yeah. You know, those came out, and a couple other small sort of thought experimenty games, and then Apocalypse World. And now we're back in like let's do these little things in Sunderlands, and you know we did Murderous Ghosts, and we did Sunderlands and Siren the Pursuit and things like that. And I can feel that in ways that's like, okay, what's the next big thing that's coming out? I don't even know whether it's going to be a big thing, because as we design, you keep designing, and you can't always predict what you're going to be able to design or what's going to come pounding through design-wise. But I definitely think that point that Flavio just made about having smaller games in between larger games from a play standpoint and from a design point is really cool, because one thing that Flavio hit on that I want to underscore is doing one thing well. Mechanics. In a small game, you can say, okay, this mechanic, I want to really nail this mechanic. I really want to examine how this works, and does it work, and make it do what I want it to do, without having to think about how it might interlace with a lot of other mechanics and a lot of other loops of rules and how that all works. I don't want to think about that. I just want to examine this cool idea for a mechanic. And I think that is a place where things like Scoundrel in the Deep and a lot of the other small games we've talked about, but also Daniel Solis games really do that. We have another question here, which is Jim Dag asks, what about games whose mechanics are discovered and established in play? And he references John Harper's work of Ghost Echo and World of Dungeons and things like that. So games whose mechanics are discovered or established in play. What do you think?
Well, that's certainly a small hurdle to jump to start the game. And if you have a group that's interested in basically doing game design while they play their characters, I mean, you are probably getting two forms of entertainment at a time. And yeah, I remember especially Ghost Echo. I mean, it's one page full of interesting and suggestive words.
Yay!
And maybe one probably dice mechanic, because it's not really written down how you use it, and off you go. So yeah, it's one of those exercises of pattern recognition and making stuff up. I'm sure every game of Ghost Echo tends to be very different from the others. And yeah, I don't know. It certainly starts small, but I think it's deceptively small, because you're doing two things at a time. You're playing and you're designing the game.
Right. So I wouldn't say that that was discovered so much as a second part. You know, it's established or emergent. You know, we create the framework we need as we're going along in a particular game, and some games can do that really well, and I suspect that it is smaller games, because for a larger game, one that depends on more world building or more backstory or more overarching theme or overarching story that someone has to hold that space, I doubt that it would work as well. A game that comes to my mind for this might be The Quiet Year as well, where there's a lot of emergent stuff that affects how the flow of the game goes. I also think that there's a whole bunch of other small games that we don't even really look at so much, which are, you know, Victorian parlor games and guessing games and riddle games and all kinds of games that do have this exact thing in them where you discover the mechanic. One of my favorite games of this nature is called Are We in the Game? And how Are We in the Game works is you know, if I know we're playing the game, and maybe Flavio and Kira know we're playing the game, but Renato doesn't know yet, so we know we're in the game, and Renato has to figure out what the rules are, and he has to figure that out by asking us questions, which we can answer with yes, no, or maybe. It's a fantastic game. It's great fun, but it's fun because it's a puzzle and because we know we're all playing how that works goes, or maybe. And then what happens is that forever after, when one of us asks the other one a question, it's like, oh, Flavio, what time are we meeting tomorrow? And he can say, I don't know. Are we in the game? Because there's a coded answer for how you answer questions. And I love those sorts of games. Some people hate those sorts of games. But I think that's a place where the discovering the mechanics in play, that's reinterpreting the question a little bit. There's really, in terms of one, which I think Jim is referencing with Ghost Echo, is creating the framework as we go along. And the other is there is an established mechanic or established rule that some people know and others discover, and that the fun lies in watching the other people slowly discover and sort of that discovery process, which is super fun. I want there to be a whole convention of just parlor games, you know, weird games like that where you figure out the rules and you're in on some of them, but you're not in on others. You have to figure it out. And I want a whole bunch of the weird ones are like there's somebody dead in a room and you have to figure out why. Like there's a man dead in a room with 53 bicycles. What happened? Like, oh well, I know the answer to that one. He was cheating at cards. That's the answer to that one.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? You're like, oh yes, of course, he was cheating at cards. There's 53 bicycles. Yeah, I love those. So there's a whole bunch of small games that, as game designers and as game players, I think there's so many more out there than we even think about. And these are exactly the part I think Flavio was saying. It's to take a breath between. And if we reincorporate not only the games that we're designing and producing now that are new, but also these other small games that have existed for a very long time, if we can bring those back into our repertoire of games that are available that we can play, especially if we get small enough social footprint so that they are, they don't need dice, they don't need a table, they just need a couple people who know the rules and can play, then you get to play games everywhere. You know, waiting for the bus, standing in line at a convention, you know, going for a walk, anywhere. It becomes wide open. And then there's a process of breaking down like who you can play with. And that's the last barrier for me that I'm trying to address with this cycle of small games, small seasonal games you can play with anyone. Have a goal here, and this loops back to what Kira said at the beginning, of being able to play these with people who are not gamers, with my little cousins, with my, well, I guess my little niece and nephews, with my neighbors, with people at the library or whatever, anybody that I came across, or even more so, and this is a big audience for me, the parents of my kids' gaming group friends. So I have 10 teenagers here pretty much every Friday, and I'm friends with most of the parents, or most of the parents are like, what are you doing? I think it's cool, but I don't quite know. And having more games where it's like, all right, you're here to pick up your kid, and you've got 10 minutes to hang out while they wrap up their game. Let's play a little game, and I'll show you some examples. And I think that's really cool.
And there's another thing that Kira said that I wanna underline. The fact that there's so many of these small games now, it's also because you don't feel overwhelmed by the idea of designing one. You also were saying something about this before. You don't have to plan for a long book because that's how it's done. I mean, the whole last year's Game Chef was mostly short games, in part because Avery put one of the theme was try not to think about a book. So, and that's one creative constraint that helped. But in general, these examples are showing people like me. I mean, Scandal started as a joke on Google Plus because Epidia was joking about using lit matches to play Dread, walking Dread. And that's how I started thinking about the lit match as a game mechanic, and then I started thinking about doing a tiny nano game like Epidia was doing with Boston Starlit and so on, and maybe make it fit on a, I don't know, a postcard, or even though that's pretty crazy, on the inside of a matchbook.
Yes, that would be super cool. That'd be super cool.
It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit right now.
Well, yeah.
No,
there's got to be books of matches out there that it could work for, right?
Yeah, really.
If you have a big enough book of matches.
We probably need to fold.
Yeah, exactly. Like a little accordion fold.
We're not actually discarding that option for the future.
Yeah.
We're not.
I bet if you went to Vegas, there'd be some hotel that had a big enough, fancy enough, like, oh yeah, that's huge. I'm gonna I'm gonna be on after this. I'm gonna be on Google going. All right, biggest matchbook covers ever. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it started like that.
Yeah.
It got a bit bigger, and it might the manual itself might gain another 3 or 4 pages maybe of explanations because as of now it's published inside Epidia's Sword and Sorcery eZine, so a lot of the context is provided by simply being there
Yeah.
in the middle of all that Sword and Sorcery, so we don't need to
Awesome.
explain anything. But on the other hand, once you learn the game and you internalize the ritual, you don't really need the rules. You just need the matchbook or the matchbox. So it's going probably maybe going for circle and becoming tiny again.
Yeah.
Which is great.
That was the idea in the development about making all the ritual phrase and the ritual movements about the match and the matchbook or matchbox. So that when you have the matchbox in hand, you have the right to talk. If you don't have the matchbook, you are not the one that can talk after and before the match is lit. So if you learn the rules, you can play the game without having the rules with you. Just the matchbox and matchbook.
This hits exactly to something that's going on in G Plus a lot right now, which is talking about GMs and who GMs and why and how and where and what do you like to GM and not, and what you guys have designed and some of the other games that we've referenced in this last hour. It's almost been a whole hour. Are games that you can learn easily. Like once you have learned any of the games that like the little game, most of the games we've talked about, once you know how to play Holly and the Ivy, you can teach that. You can play like the each one teach one that they use in schools and other places where it's not, it doesn't, the role of the GM becomes so decentralized because once you know how to play this, you can go play it. You can go, there's a lack of boundary there at all. Just go do it. You know how. It takes 10 minutes. You know? And that, I think, is huge. Yeah, because then totally. It provides, it's a stepping stone to other things. If people want to do that stepping stone in terms of design work, in terms of production, like what they're creating, if you've made a little business card size game, you can probably jump up to like, oh, maybe my next one's going to be, what if I used like a little notebook size game? I bet I could do that. Yes, you can. Go do it. And same with Design Space and all those other things. All right, Kira.
Oh. Meg. No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think that small games can be a good teaching tool for people who want to facilitate games or GM games that maybe haven't in the past. For all the reasons that you just said, it kind of it decentralizes the responsibility. Everybody at the table can share the responsibility of learning and playing the game together. And so, you know, it can teach you different parts of role-playing games that you might not really be able to learn from a how to GM paragraph in a larger book, you know? And I think that goes back to, like, small mechanics or experimenting with mechanics, you know? Like, there are games that are intentionally designed to teach you about role-playing games and, like, how to GM. Like, I feel like Dream Askew is a really great game that teaches you how to run Apocalypse World. And play in Apocalypse World in a really kind of a funny, deconstructed way because it's GM-less. And so that's kind of cool. It's like a one-shot. You could do that as a one-shot. I was thinking of another one. Didn't Epi make a game that was like, what is a role-playing game?
Yes.
Like a nano game?
Astronauts and bank robbers. Go.
Yeah. So just thinking about that. And, you know, as far as accessibility, like new GMs or, you know, for women or people who are new to the gaming scene in general, you know, I think that's really helpful and awesome. And considering that when you're making those games is really cool, too.
I also think that there's one more thing to touch on, which is that if you're making a little tiny game, that it's all circular, right? It all comes back again and again and again to things we said earlier. The ability to focus on one thing. You know, Emily Careboss, when she did Breaking the Ice, nobody was doing games that dealt with relationships or emotions or anything like that. I mean, that was like 2002 or something crazy old back there. But she made this little game about, you know, a little dating game, and now there's scads of them that are all different types. And then we get into like the sliding scale of like, what is a short game? You know, is GXB by Ben Lehman a short game? Clover's a short game for sure. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is there's more of them, and I think the accessibility to design into that space and experiment with little things, and then produce whatever shape it is, whether it's a PDF or a matchbook or a 3x5 card or whatever. Wouldn't it be fun to go into like McDonald's and have those little triangle? I haven't been in McDonald's in like 15 years, but anyway,
maybe a cafe.
It'd be fun to go into somewhere like that and have those little like stand-uppy things that they put on tents and little tent table thingies. Wouldn't it be fun if there was like 2 tiny games on that? That'd be so cool. You know, while you're waiting for your meal to arrive, you may put, you know, here's some game options if you want them. Oh, awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, something with the format of What is a Role-Playing Game by Epidia would fit perfectly. I mean, on one side you get, you are the, I don't know, you're running a game. Ask the person in front of you X.
Yeah, exactly.
You are a robber, and what are you doing now?
Yeah.
So, before you know, you're playing that.
Definitely.
Okay,
all right, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's do that.
Yeah, we should. I agree. So let's go right now. Closing thoughts. Our hour is up, and like, so for you, what do you like in terms of game that you might be working on now? What is it? Are you working on a game now? How big is that game? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
go Flavio.
Yeah.
I'm working on a game that is not a role-playing game and is not a story game. I'm working on a game that has a working name is A Solid War, and is about the civil war in Italy at the end of World War II.
This is the map game that you're working on with
all?
Yes,
is the one you saw at Summer Etruscan last year. Yes.
That's so cool.
We will have it to play test in April.
Nice.
At the Play convention in Modena, and I will let you know how it goes. The play test. It's from me and Luca Velluzzini.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. Kira.
Yes. I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now, but the one that's most present and that I'm most excited about is called Mobilize, and it's a LARP that is going to be part of a World War II series of LARPs that Mo is putting together. It's all about women in World War II, and Mobilize, my LARP in particular, is going to be about queer women in the U.S. and how they first kind of gathered and found each other at army bases and military bases throughout the U.S. And we're kind of able to experience like, hey, I'm walking into the base. There's another butch woman. You know, she's got her hair cut short and she's wearing pants because women could do that for the first time. And so they were identifying more as queer. And then kind of how that started the civil rights movement after World War II. For cats and lesbians, for gay men and women who were soldiers. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'll be the slacker. Now, I have a couple of ideas, but they're pretty up in the air about games. So I'll probably kick them around and discuss them with Flavio and see what comes out of it.
That's cool. See, that's I think another thing that small games do is they give us the time for downtime, for creative downtime. because you guys just put out Scoundrel in the Deep, you know, and it doesn't matter how big a finished product is. The design work still takes energy and time, and after you put out a game, it's still good to okay, I'm going to take a breather, let things percolate, see what happens next. So, and I think small games allow us to do that well too. So. My next game is coming out in 6 weeks. It's called A Branch of May, and it's the 4th in my series of small games that are coming out this year. It is mostly done. It still needs work. You know, I still need to do some stuff with it and make sure it's all settled properly. So that's coming out. Then after that, I've got the next one. The 5th one is coming out in end of June. That's also well underway. Thank God. So that's the thing I'm doing. And then there's other things that I'm slightly bigger things. There's a game about abandoned spaces that I've been mulling over for a while. I want to get that sorted out. But not this year. I think this year is pretty much set up with the Playing Nature's Year games. Thank you, Patreon. Yeah. All right, so I guess that's it. Our hour is up, and I guess if anybody's watching this and wants to talk more about small games, they should find us on G+, because we're all on G+.
Yeah.
And, that'd be great. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you to our listening audience.
Thank you all. Bye.